What would you do if you saw your wife at the airport, surrounded by three teenage girls who look exactly like her younger self? Girls who call her mom.
I saw my wife, Julia, long before she saw me. We were at the airport and she was moving with this incredible lightness, a grace I hadn't seen in her for years. She was practically glowing. But she wasn't alone, and that's what made me stop dead in my tracks. Walking beside her were three teenage girls, laughing and talking as if they were in their own little world. And each one of them looked so much like Julia, it was uncanny. My breath caught in my throat. They had the same auburn waves she had when we first met, the same bright green spark in their eyes. Even their smiles curved in that same familiar way. I stood there, watching them, feeling this strange mix of awe and dread wash over me. Then, the oldest girl called her Mom, and the sound was like a punch to the gut. I nearly stumbled backward. Julia had never mentioned other children. We only have our daughter, Emily. We'd struggled for years to have more kids, going through countless appointments and heartbreaking disappointments. She had cried with me through every single failure. Yet here she was, radiant and maternal, with three daughters I had never even heard of. I ducked behind a large column, my feet suddenly glued to the floor. My phone buzzed. It was a text from her claiming she was still out of town on her business trip. The lie was so blatant it burned through me. She was standing just feet away from me while pretending to be hundreds of miles apart. I tried to steady my breathing as I watched her hand the girls some documents, probably their boarding passes. They all hugged her tightly, one by one, before heading toward the boarding gate. Her smile trembled as she let them go. It was a look I'd only ever seen her give to Emily. The girls vanished down the jet bridge, and Julia was left standing alone. She wiped a tear from her eye, so quickly you'd miss it if you weren't looking. Then she pulled out her phone. 30 seconds later, mine buzzed again, another lie. It felt like my entire life had just tilted on its axis. Nothing was familiar anymore. I wanted to march right up to her, to demand answers, to yell, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped between confusion and a fear I couldn't name. She turned and walked away from the gate, her posture heavy, as if that goodbye had cost her something real. I followed her, keeping my distance, my mind too stunned to form a coherent thought. She exited the terminal and climbed into a rideshare car without a second glance. I watched the car disappear into traffic before I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. None of this made any sense. The weight of it all pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I wandered through the airport like a ghost until I found a quiet bar tucked away in a corner. My hands were shaking as I ordered a drink. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of those girls. They weren't just similar to Julia. They were like perfect younger copies of her. The resemblance was too exact to be a coincidence. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, but every possibility felt insane. I started replaying every conversation Julia and I had over the last few years, searching for clues I might have missed. I tried to recall every business trip she'd taken. Suddenly, little things that never bothered me before seemed suspicious. The late nights she said she was working at her nonprofit job. Her frequent conferences and training seminars. She always traveled alone, she'd said. I wondered, how many times had she walked through an airport just like she did today? How long had she been living this secret second life? The bartender leaned over and asked if I was all right. I just muttered something about travel stress. How could I possibly explain the truth? It was too bizarre to even say out loud. I stayed in that bar until they closed, just staring at the wall, seeing nothing. When I finally left, the city air felt colder than usual. I couldn't bring myself to go home. The thought of facing Emily, of holding this massive secret while looking into her innocent eyes, felt unbearable. I wasn't ready to speak this into existence, to make it real. I ended up sleeping in my car near the beach, though sleep was a distant stranger. The waves crashed against the shore, mirroring the chaos in my head. The next morning I just drove. Aimlessly, I needed to gather my thoughts, to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to just pretend I hadn't seen anything, to go back to the life I had yesterday. Another part of me wanted to confront Julia the second she walked through the door. But a bigger part, a colder part, was terrified of what she might say. What if the truth was worse than anything I could imagine? When I finally pulled into our driveway, Julia's car was already there. She greeted me at the door with a warm smile that felt completely wrong. She started talking casually about flight delays and terrible airport food. Every word she spoke was a lie, and it echoed in the space between us. She handed Emily a souvenir from a city she had never even been to. They laughed together in the kitchen, and for a moment it was just a normal evening in a normal home. But I stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder, an outsider in my own life. The warmth of our home, a place that had always been my sanctuary, now felt artificial and fragile. Julia moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, every gesture perfectly familiar, perfectly normal. I kept waiting for her to slip up to show some sign of the lie she was living, but she was flawless. She kissed my cheek and asked about my day. I answered on autopilot, the words hollow and distant. I searched her eyes for a flicker of the woman I thought I knew, the woman I married. But all I found was a version of her I couldn't trust. That night she slept soundly beside me, her breathing even and calm. I just stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering, how many years had she been lying to me? Who were those girls, really? And who was Julia? Who was this woman sleeping next to me? Morning came, but it brought no clarity, only more questions. I watched her pack her bag for work, just like any other day. She kissed Emily on the forehead and asked me to pick up some groceries on my way home. Everything she did was so normal, it was almost painful to watch. But I could feel the truth lurking just beneath the surface of her calm routine. The image of those three girls, her daughters, lingered in my mind like a persistent shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had been split in two. There was the world I thought I lived in, the one with my wife and our daughter, Emily, and then there was the world I saw at the airport. I knew that sooner or later I would have to choose which one to believe, and I knew that choice would change everything. But for now, I just watched her walk out the door, leaving me alone in a house that no longer felt like home. Thanks for watching. If you've ever faced a moment that changed everything, you know how isolating it can feel. Remember to subscribe for more stories that make you think. See you next time.